Commander Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station watching the morning shift begin their work on the asteroid mining platforms below. The sight never got old for him. 50,000 humans had made this place their home in the deep space between stars. Children ran through the corridors on their way to school, while their parents worked the mines or tended the hydroponic farms that fed the entire station. Dr. Lisa Hamilton walked up beside him carrying her morning coffee and smiled. She had been the chief medical officer here for 3 years and had delivered more than 200 babies in that time. The population was growing fast and everyone felt hopeful about humanity's future among the stars. Chief Engineer Ryan Parker joined them. At the window, his hands were still dirty from working on the fusion reactors that powered their small world. He pointed to a group of children playing in the park dome below and laughed. His own daughter was among them. The 3 friends had built something beautiful here at the edge of known space. Kepler Station was more than just a mining operation. It was proof that humans could thrive anywhere they chose to plant their flag. The work was hard, but the people were happy and the future looked bright. Everything changed when the Zephyrian ships appeared. Jake saw them first on the long-range sensors. 5 massive vessels dropping out of hyperspace near the station. The ships were elegant and curved like living things with surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Zephyrian technology was far beyond what humans could build, but the aliens had always been peaceful in their previous contacts with Earth. Ambassador Veltar requested permission to dock and Jake granted it immediately. The Zephyrians had visited human worlds before to discuss trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Their empire controlled thousands of star systems and had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They viewed humans as a young species that might someday be useful partners in trade. The ambassador arrived with a small escort of guards wearing ornate armor that glowed with inner light. Veltar was tall and thin with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to look right through a person. Jake had met Zephyrians before and found them polite but distant. They spoke in measured tones and seemed to consider every word carefully before speaking. The meeting took place in the station's main conference room. Veltar sat across from Jake and several other senior staff members. Lisa and Ryan were there, along with the station's security chief and trade coordinator. The ambassador spoke about expanding mining operations and sharing technology that could help humans extract more resources from the asteroids. Everything seemed normal until Veltar asked about the station's population records. He wanted detailed information about every person living on Kepler Station, including their ages and genetic backgrounds. Jake found the request strange, but assumed it was part of some Zephyrian bureaucratic process. The ambassador studied the data on his portable device for several minutes. His large eyes grew brighter, and he exchanged glances with his guards. Something passed between them that Jake could not understand, but it made him uncomfortable. Veltar stood up suddenly and smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. He thanked Jake for the information and said his people would be in touch soon about the proposed trade agreements. The Zephyrians left the station and returned to their ships, which remained in orbit around Kepler Station. Jake went to bed that night feeling uneasy about the meeting, but he could not explain why. The Zephyrians had been polite and professional as always. Perhaps he was just tired from the long day of negotiations. He woke up to alarms screaming throughout the station. The attack began without warning in the early hours of the morning shift. Zephyrian fighter craft swarmed through the docking bays while larger ships targeted the station's defensive systems. The weapons they used were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Beams of purple energy that cut through metal like paper and explosions that seemed to eat away at whatever they touched. Jake ran through corridors filled with smoke and screaming people. Families were trying to reach the emergency shelters while security teams fought a hopeless battle against the invaders. The Zephyrian soldiers moved through the station like ghosts. Their armor protected them from human weapons, while their own guns cut down anyone who stood in their way. Lisa was in the medical bay, trying to treat the wounded when a Zephyrian soldier found her. Jake arrived just in time to see the alien kill her with a single shot. The sight of his friend dying filled him with rage and horror. These were not the polite diplomats he had met yesterday. These were killers. Ryan died defending the reactor controls. The children from the park were herded into cargo holds like animals. Jake saw families torn apart and people who had been his neighbors for years murdered in cold blood. The Zephyrians showed no mercy to anyone. A small group of survivors made it to the emergency shuttle bay. Jake found himself leading them as they fought their way through the station. Behind them, the place they had called home was burning. The aliens were not just killing people. They were taking prisoners and loading them onto their ships for reasons Jake could not understand. The shuttle launched just as Kepler Station's fusion reactors overloaded. Jake watched through the rear window as the explosion consumed everything he had worked to build. 50,000 people had lived there that morning. Now only 30 survivors remained huddled in the cramped shuttle heading for Earth. The journey home took 2 weeks. Jake spent every hour of it thinking about what he had seen. The Zephyrians had not attacked them in anger or for territory. The assault had been planned and systematic. They had wanted something specific from Kepler Station, and they had been willing to kill everyone to get it. When Earth appeared in the shuttle's viewports, Jake felt no relief. He carried news that would change everything. The galaxy was not the peaceful place humanity had believed it to be. The Zephyrians were not the wise elder race they pretended to be. They were predators, and humanity had just become their prey. President Helen Davis sat in the emergency session of the Colonial Defense Council, listening to Jake Morrison's report about Kepler Station. The 30 survivors had been debriefed extensively since their arrival on Earth 3 days ago. Every detail of the attack had been recorded and analyzed by military intelligence. The room was filled with Earth's top military and political leaders. Admiral Patricia Lee commanded the Colonial Defense Fleet while General Marcus Webb controlled ground forces. Dr. Carl Stone represented the scientific community and had spent years studying alien technology. All of them struggled to understand what had happened at humanity's most distant outpost. Jake finished his testimony and the room fell silent. The images from Kepler Station showed complete destruction. 50,000 people dead in a matter of hours. The Zephyrians had never shown any hostility toward humans before this attack. Their empire had existed for thousands of years without expanding into human space. President Davis wanted to believe this was an isolated incident. Perhaps a rogue Zephyrian commander had acted without orders from the Empire. The alternative was too terrible to consider. If the Zephyrians had declared war on humanity, then Earth's colonies were defenseless against their advanced technology. The debate continued for hours. Some council members urged immediate military mobilization, while others preferred diplomatic solutions. Messages were sent to the Zephyrian Empire requesting an explanation for the attack. Earth's ambassadors tried to contact Zephyrian officials through established channels. The Zephyrians never responded to any diplomatic efforts. 2 weeks after Jake's testimony, the first reports began arriving from other human colonies. Captain Ben Rogers had been piloting a cargo ship through the New Eden system when Zephyrian vessels appeared. He watched from orbit as the agricultural world cities burned under alien weapons. Ben transmitted everything he saw back to Earth before jumping to hyperspace. The recording showed Zephyrian bioships descending on New Eden like a swarm of insects. These vessels were different from the elegant warships that had attacked Kepler Station. They were organic-looking things that pulsed with their own inner light. The bioships landed in populated areas and began processing the human inhabitants. Ben's cameras captured images that would haunt everyone who saw them. The Zephyrians were not simply killing people. They were harvesting them. Massive organic structures grew from the bioships like cancerous tumors. Humans were herded into these processing centers where alien machinery extracted something from their bodies. The victims remained conscious during the procedure, and their screams could be heard even through the vacuum of space. Commander Amy Foster tried to defend the colony world of New Sydney with her small patrol fleet. She had 3 destroyers and a cruiser against 20 Zephyrian warships. The battle lasted less than an hour. Human weapons barely scratched the alien shields while Zephyrian energy beams cut through. Earth's best armor like tissue paper, Amy's final transmission described. The horror unfolding on New Sydney's surface. The Zephyrians had landed ground forces that moved through the cities with terrifying efficiency. They separated children from adults and sorted people by age and health. The strongest were taken alive while the weak were simply killed, Dr. Carl. Stone studied the recovered data from New Eden and New Sydney with growing horror. He had spent his career researching Zephyrian technology through cultural exchange programs. The aliens had always presented themselves as an enlightened civilization interested in peaceful cooperation with younger species. The evidence from the attacks revealed a different truth. The Zephyrians had been studying human biology for decades. Through seemingly innocent diplomatic contacts, every human who had ever met with Zephyrian officials had been secretly scanned and analyzed. The aliens had been mapping human neural pathways and genetic structures. Carl discovered the real purpose behind the harvest operations when he examined captured Zephyrian equipment. The organic processing centers were designed to extract human brain tissue while keeping the nervous system active. The neural patterns were then integrated into Zephyrian biocomputers that controlled their warships. Human consciousness made their technology more efficient. The Zephyrians had discovered that human neural networks could process tactical data faster than their own organic computers. They were literally turning people into components for their war machines. The scope of the harvest became clear as more reports arrived from across human space. Every colony world was under attack. The Zephyrians called it the Great Harvest, and they had planned it for years. Entire fleets of bioships were systematically processing humanity's scattered settlements, admiralized every available warship to defend Earth and the core colonies. The colonial defense fleet had seemed impressive when it was built to protect against pirates and smugglers. Against the Zephyrian Empire, it was pathetically inadequate. The first major battle took place at Alpha Centauri, where Admiral Lie led a fleet of 40 ships against a Zephyrian harvest group. The engagement was a disaster for humanity. Zephyrian shields absorbed everything the human fleet could throw at them while alien weapons tore through Earth's best ships like paper. 26 human vessels were destroyed in the battle. The survivors retreated toward Earth carrying recordings of their defeat. The Zephyrians did not pursue them immediately. They were too busy processing the 3 million people who lived on Alpha Centauri's colony worlds. President Davis declared martial law as refugee ships fled toward Earth from every direction. The outer colonies were being systematically harvested while Earth's military proved unable to stop the aliens. Panic spread through the core worlds as people realized their government could not protect them. Jake Morrison found himself leading survivor groups that had escaped the harvest. These were not professional soldiers but ordinary people who had lost everything to the aliens. Farmers whose crops had been burned, parents whose children had been taken, workers who had watched their friends processed by alien machines. The survivors shared stories that painted a picture of systematic genocide. The Zephyrians were not interested in conquering human territory or enslaving the population. They were harvesting people like cattle and turning their neural tissue into biological computers. Some survivors described seeing their processed relatives, still conscious inside Zephyrian bioships. The aliens kept human brains alive and aware, while using them to control weapon systems. Death would have been merciful compared to the fate that awaited anyone captured during the harvest. Dr. Stone worked frantically to develop weapons that might penetrate Zephyrian defenses. His research team had access to alien technology recovered from battle sites, but the enemy's scientific knowledge was centuries ahead of Earth's capabilities. Every breakthrough seemed insignificant compared to the Empire's overwhelming advantages. The psychological impact on humanity was devastating. People had believed they were part of a larger galactic community with the Zephyrians as wise elder guides. The reality was that they had been marked for harvest from their first contact with the Empire. Everything they had built among the stars was being systematically destroyed. As Earth's outer defenses fell one by one, President Davis faced an impossible choice. The planet could not be defended against the harvest fleets that were moving steadily inward through human space. Evacuation was impossible with billions of people and nowhere safe to run. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy for millennia through superior technology and overwhelming force. No species had ever successfully resisted their expansion or challenged their authority. Humanity seemed destined to become another entry in their catalog of harvested civilizations, but something was different about the human response to the harvest. Other species had apparently submitted to their fate when the Zephyrians arrived. Humans were fighting back with a desperation and fury that surprised their alien enemies. Every colony that fell took longer to process than the Zephyrians had planned. The Empire had underestimated something fundamental about human nature. They had studied human biology and technology, but they had not understood human psychology. The systematic murder of children and the harvesting of conscious minds had awakened something primal in the species. Humanity was learning to hate with a purity that would reshape the galaxy. Dr. Susan Wright was working late in her laboratory on Luna Base when the attack began. She had been developing experimental quantum weapons for the Colonial Defense Fleet, but the project had been classified as too dangerous for practical use. The weapons could tear apart matter at the atomic level, but they were unstable and required massive amounts of power to operate. Luna Base housed 12,000 researchers and their families in a cluster of domes on the moon's surface. The facility was supposed to be safe from the Zephyrian harvest fleets that were destroying colonies throughout human space. Earth's moon was heavily defended, and the aliens had not yet penetrated the inner solar system. Susan's daughter Katie was sleeping in their quarters when the first explosions shook the base. The 8-year-old girl woke up scared and confused as alarms began screaming throughout the complex. Susan ran to her daughter's room and found Katie crying as the lights flickered and the floor trembled beneath their feet. The Zephyrian assault on Luna Base was different from their previous attacks. They did not send bioships to harvest the population. Instead, they deployed ground forces that moved through the research facility with systematic precision. The aliens were looking for something specific among the laboratories and data. Storage centers. Colonel Steve Martinez commanded the base's security forces and organized the defense from the command center. He had fought in the colonial wars against human separatists, but nothing had prepared him for this enemy. The Zephyrian soldiers moved like ghosts through the corridors. Their weapons cut through the base's defensive systems, and their armor absorbed everything the human defenders could throw at them. Susan grabbed Katie and joined other civilians evacuating through emergency tunnels. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew closer as Martinez's men fell back toward the residential areas. The colonel's voice echoed through the communication system, urging everyone to reach the escape pods before the aliens broke through their lines. The evacuation was chaos. Thousands of people crowded into tunnels that were only designed for hundreds. Children were separated from their parents in the crush, while researchers tried to carry important data files with them. Susan held Katie tight and pushed through the crowd toward the nearest pod bay. They almost made it. The Zephyrian soldiers reached the residential section just as the last groups of civilians were boarding escape pods. Susan saw the aliens for the first time up close and felt her blood freeze. They were tall and elegant like all their species, but their eyes held no emotion at all. They looked at human children the same way someone might look at insects. Katie was torn from Susan's arms by an alien soldier who grabbed the child like she was a piece of equipment. The girl's screams echoed through the pod bay as more Zephyrians herded civilians away from the escape vessels. They were not killing people quickly like in the previous attacks. They were taking prisoners for some other purpose. Susan watched helplessly as Katie was dragged away with dozens of other children. The Zephyrians sorted their captives by age and health, while their weapons kept the adults from interfering. Anyone who tried to help the children was shot immediately. The execution of the children began without ceremony. The Zephyrian soldiers lined them up against a wall and killed them one by one with precise shots to the head. They did not speak or show any emotion during the massacre. The children died begging for their parents while the aliens worked with mechanical efficiency. Katie was among the last to die. She looked toward Susan with tears streaming down her face and whispered that she loved her mommy. The Zephyrian soldier pressed his weapon against the little girl's head and pulled the trigger without hesitation. Susan's scream of rage and grief filled the pod bay. She tried to reach her daughter's body, but other survivors held her back as more Zephyrians approached their position. The aliens ignored the parents' anguish and continued processing their prisoners with cold professionalism. The few survivors who escaped Luna Base carried video recordings of the massacre with them back to Earth. The images spread through every remaining human settlement within hours. Children being systematically executed while their parents watched helplessly. Alien soldiers showing no more emotion than someone might feel while exterminating vermin. The psychological impact on humanity was immediate and devastating. The clinical nature of the children's deaths was somehow worse than the bioship harvests happening on distant colonies. These aliens did not kill in anger or passion. They murdered human children with the same detachment they might feel when disposing of garbage. President Davis convened an emergency session of the Colonial Defense Council to address the crisis. The video from Luna Base played on screens around the conference table while Earth's leaders watched in stunned silence. Several council members were openly weeping by the time the recording ended. The debate that followed was brief and decisive. Any discussion of diplomatic solutions died with the children on Luna Base. The Zephyrians had demonstrated that they viewed humans as nothing more than resources to be processed or obstacles to be eliminated. There could be no negotiation with creatures that murdered defenseless children without emotion. Colonel Martinez survived the attack on Luna Base and addressed the council about what he had witnessed. His report was clinical and professional, but his eyes burned with hatred when he described watching the aliens kill Katie Wright and the other children. He recommended immediate mobilization of every available military asset for total war against the Zephyrian Empire. The colonel's words resonated with everyone in the room. These were not politicians or diplomats anymore. They were parents and grandparents who had seen what the aliens did to human children. The measured response that some leaders had favored was swept away by a tide of pure rage. President Davis authorized Project Prometheus despite the protests of some scientific advisors, who considered the weapons too dangerous for deployment. Dr. Wright threw herself into the research with desperate intensity. She had failed to save her daughter, but she could still create weapons that would make the aliens pay for Katie's death. The quantum disruptor technology that had been shelved as impractical suddenly became humanity's highest priority. Susan worked 18-hour days alongside teams of researchers who had lost their own families to the harvest. They were no longer developing defensive weapons. They were creating instruments of revenge. Jake Morrison had been organizing resistance groups among the survivors scattered throughout human space. The people who joined him were not professional soldiers, but they shared something more powerful than military training. They had all lost everything to the Zephyrian harvest, and they burned with the need for vengeance. The resistance fighters learned to use captured alien weapons and adapted human technology for guerrilla warfare. They struck at Zephyrian outposts and supply lines with tactics that the Empire had never encountered before. Where other species had submitted to harvesting, humans fought back with increasing skill and viciousness. Reports from across human space described similar resistance movements forming wherever survivors gathered. Farmers who had watched their crops burn now built improvised explosives. Parents who had lost children learned to pilot captured Zephyrian fighters. Workers who had seen their friends harvested became experts at sabotage and assassination. The transformation of human society was complete and irreversible. The peaceful civilization that had explored the stars with wonder and optimism was gone forever. In its place was something harder and angrier that existed for one purpose alone: the systematic destruction of every Zephyrian in the galaxy. Admiral Lee began planning Operation Retribution while Dr. Wright's team made breakthrough after breakthrough in weapons development. The first quantum disruptors would be ready for deployment within months. Human ships were being retrofitted with the new weapons while ground forces trained for assaults on Zephyrian installations. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia was about to face an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Other species had fought for territory or resources or survival. Humans were fighting for something much more dangerous. They were fighting for revenge against creatures that had murdered their children. The Zephyrians had awakened something in humanity that would not rest until every alien world was reduced to ash. They had taught humans to hate with perfect purity. And now they would learn the consequences of that lesson. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when humanity stopped trying to be civilized and embrace the monsters that lived in their hearts. The species that had once dreamed of peaceful exploration among the stars was preparing to become the most feared predators in known space. KD. Wright and the other children who died on Luna Base would be avenged. Their deaths had transformed humanity from prey into predators, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. Dr. Susan Wright stood in her laboratory watching the first quantum disruptor weapon charge to full power. The device hummed with barely contained energy that could tear apart matter at the atomic level. 6 months of desperate research had produced something that might finally penetrate Zephyrian shields. The weapon was ugly and brutal compared to the elegant energy beams the aliens used. Human technology had always been rougher and less refined than what other species developed. But ugliness did not matter anymore. Only killing power mattered. Captain Tony Rodriguez commanded the strike team that would test the new weapons against a Zephyrian harvesting facility. His crew had volunteered for the mission knowing they might not survive. Everyone on the ship had lost family members to the aliens, and they were eager to finally strike back. The target was a bioship processing center on the former colony world of Haven. The Zephyrians had landed their organic vessels there 3 weeks ago and were systematically harvesting the population. Satellite images showed thousands of humans being fed into the alien machines while their neural patterns were extracted for use in Zephyrian computers. Tony's ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Haven system and immediately detected Zephyrian patrol vessels moving to intercept. The aliens had grown confident after months of easy victories against human forces. Their shields had never been penetrated by Earth's primitive weapons. The first quantum disruptor blast tore through a Zephyrian cruiser like it was made of paper. The alien vessel simply ceased to exist as its atoms were scattered across space. The remaining Zephyrian ships stopped their approach and began transmitting what sounded like confused communications to each other. Tony pressed his advantage and targeted the bioships on Haven's surface. The quantum disruptors reached through the planet's atmosphere and struck the organic processing centers with devastating effect. The alien machines that had been harvesting humans were reduced to scattered particles in seconds. The rescue operation that followed was the first human victory since the harvest began. Tony's team landed on Haven and found nearly 2,000 survivors hiding in the ruins of their cities. These people had spent weeks watching their friends and neighbors processed by alien machines. Now they were free, and their rescuers carried weapons that could kill Zephyrians. The psychological impact of the victory spread throughout human space faster than any official communication. Word passed from survivor to survivor that humans had finally developed weapons that could hurt the aliens. The quantum disruptors gave people hope for the first time since the harvest began. Engineer Kelly Thompson led the crash program to retrofit human ships with the new weapons. She had lost her husband and 2 sons to a Zephyrian bioship and threw herself into the work with mechanical precision. Her teams worked around the clock to mount quantum disruptors on every available vessel. The ships Kelly designed were built for one purpose. They were not exploration vessels or cargo haulers like the ships humans had constructed before the war. These were killers designed to hunt down Zephyrian vessels and destroy them without mercy. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Johnson developed new combat tactics that exploited humanity's advantages over their alien enemies. The Zephyrians fought according to ancient doctrines that had served their empire for thousands of years. They expected their enemies to follow predictable patterns that could be countered with established strategies. humans refused to fight by anyone else's rules. Mike's forces used guerrilla tactics and improvised weapons that confused Zephyrian commanders. Where the aliens expected formal battle lines, humans struck from unexpected directions and vanished before the enemy could respond. The first major battle using the new tactics took place at the Vega system, where a Zephyrian harvest fleet was processing the colony world's population. Admiral Lee led a human task force of 30 ships against twice as many alien vessels. The engagement should have been another disaster for humanity. Instead, it became the turning point of the war. Mike's fighters used hit-and-run tactics that scattered the Zephyrian formation, while Kelly's retrofitted cruisers targeted the bioships with quantum disruptors. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to engage in the formal combat they understood. Human pilots flew their ships like guided missiles, ramming into Zephyrian vessels after their weapons were exhausted. The sight of humans choosing death before defeat shattered the aliens' assumptions about their enemy's psychology. No species they had harvested before had shown such desperate courage. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian harvest fleet. For the first time since the war began, human forces had won a major engagement against superior numbers. The surviving bioships fled toward the outer rim, carrying reports of humanity's new weapons and tactics. Jake Morrison coordinated ground operations against Zephyrian installations throughout human space. His resistance fighters had evolved from desperate survivors into skilled soldiers who knew their enemy's weaknesses. They struck at alien outposts with precision and brutality that left no survivors. The intelligence gathered from these raids revealed crucial information about Zephyrian technology and strategy. Dr. Carl Stone analyzed captured alien equipment and discovered that their biocomputers were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. Human neural patterns made the alien systems more efficient, but they also introduced weaknesses that could be exploited. Susan Wright incorporated these discoveries into her weapon designs, creating devices that targeted Zephyrian biology directly. The new weapons did not just destroy alien ships and installations. They caused agonizing death to any Zephyrian they touched. The weapons were designed specifically to make the aliens suffer the way human children had suffered on Luna Base. The transformation of human society accelerated as victory followed victory. The peaceful civilization that had once existed was being replaced by something harder and more dangerous. Humans were learning to be efficient killers, and they discovered they had a talent for it. Production facilities throughout Earth's solar system retooled to manufacture weapons and warships. Scientists who had once studied the mysteries of the universe now devoted their knowledge to developing better ways to kill aliens. Artists created propaganda that celebrated human victories and reminded everyone why they were fighting. The Zephyrian Empire began to take notice of the resistance in human space. Reports reached their capital worlds describing defeats that should have been impossible. A primitive species was not only fighting back, but actually winning battles against Imperial forces. Emperor Zethkar ordered additional fleets to human space with instructions to crush the resistance immediately. The humans were disrupting harvest operations, and their new weapons were destroying irreplaceable bioships. The rebellion had to be stopped before it spread to other species under Zephyrian rule, but the reinforcements arrived to find an enemy. That was no longer the same species they had begun harvesting months earlier. Humans had adapted and evolved at a rate that astonished their alien opponents. Every battle taught them new lessons that they applied with deadly efficiency. Captain Lisa Morgan led a squadron of human fighters against a Zephyrian patrol near the ruins of New Eden. Her pilots used tactics that would have been considered suicide before the war. They accepted casualties that other species would find unacceptable in exchange for destroying alien vessels. The psychological warfare was as important as the physical destruction. Humans broadcast recordings of Zephyrian deaths throughout alien communication networks. The empire that had ruled through fear for millennia was learning what it felt like to be afraid. Dr. Stone's research revealed that the Zephyrians had never faced sustained resistance from any species they had harvested. Their technology and tactics were designed to overwhelm civilizations that fought defensively. They had no experience dealing with an enemy that adapted constantly and fought with suicidal determination. Admiral Lee coordinated larger operations that struck at multiple Zephyrian targets simultaneously. The aliens found themselves fighting dozens of separate engagements across human space while their opponents shared intelligence and resources through networks the Empire could not intercept. The war was entering a new phase as human forces moved from defensive operations to systematic attacks on Zephyrian infrastructure. The species that had once cowered before alien harvesters was preparing to carry the fight to the enemy's homeworlds. Susan Wright watched her latest weapon prototypes destroy captured Zephyrian bioships in test firings. The quantum disruptors had evolved into something far more sophisticated and deadly than the crude devices used in the first victories. These weapons could reach across star systems and reduce entire fleets to scattered atoms. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans stopped being prey and embraced their role as predators. The Zephyrian Empire had awakened something terrible in humanity, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. The harvest was over. The hunt had begun. General Sandra Brooks stood on the bridge of the battleship Vengeance watching Zephyr Prime grow larger in the viewscreen. The alien capital world glowed with the lights of 1 billion inhabitants who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Soon those lights would be extinguished forever. 2 years had passed since the first harvest ships arrived at Kepler Station. In that time, humanity had transformed from victims into predators. The desperate survivors who once fled from alien bioships now commanded fleets of warships, equipped with weapons specifically designed to kill Zephyrians. Operation Retribution was the culmination of everything humans had learned about warfare and hatred. 50 battle groups were converging on Zephyrian core worlds simultaneously. Each group carried enough firepower to sterilize entire planets. The aliens would learn what it meant to face extinction. Admiral Lee had planned the operation with mathematical precision. Every Zephyrian fleet position was known through intelligence gathered by resistance fighters. Every major population center had been mapped and targeted. The empire that had harvested human children would be destroyed completely and systematically. Sandra's battle group consisted of 20 ships crewed by volunteers who had lost everything to the harvest. Captain Tony Rodriguez commanded the cruiser Retribution. Engineer Kelly Thompson had designed new weapons systems that could crack planetary shields. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Johnson led ground forces trained specifically for urban warfare against alien populations. The approach to Zephyr Prime was unopposed. The aliens had withdrawn their fleets to defend other core worlds, assuming that humans lacked the ships and weapons to threaten their capital. The Emperor's advisors believed that a primitive species could never mount a serious assault on the galaxy's most heavily defended planet. They were wrong about everything. Sandra's ships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation and immediately began targeting the planet's orbital defenses. The quantum disruptors that Dr. Susan Wright had perfected over months of desperate research tore through Zephyrian shields like they were made of tissue paper. The orbital platforms that protected Zephyr Prime had never been seriously challenged in their 1,000-year history. Their weapons were designed to destroy conventional starships using energy beams and particle cannons. They had no defense against weapons that attacked matter at the atomic level. Within minutes, the planet's entire defensive network was reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The Zephyrian ground control centers fell silent as human ships achieved complete orbital supremacy over the Empire's capital world. Sandra opened a communication channel to the planet's surface and addressed Emperor Zethkar directly. Her words were broadcast throughout the Zephyrian Empire so that every alien world could hear what was about to happen to their leaders. She told the Emperor about Katie Wright and the other children who had been murdered on Luna Base. She described the harvest operations and the bioships that had processed conscious humans into computer components. She explained that humanity had not forgotten any of the atrocities committed against their species. The Emperor's reply was filled with arrogance and threats. He called humans a primitive species that would be crushed by the Empire's superior technology. He promised that the few survivors would be harvested slowly as punishment for their rebellion against their betters. Sandra smiled as she listened to the alien ruler's words. The Zephyrians still did not understand what they had created when they murdered human children. They thought this was a territorial dispute that could be resolved through negotiation or superior firepower. They were about to learn the difference between conquest and extermination. The bombardment of Zephyr Prime began with surgical strikes against government and military targets. Sandra's gunners used precision weapons to destroy the Emperor's palace and the command centers that coordinated the Empire's operations. The aliens who had ordered the harvest of human worlds died in the first moments of the attack, but destroying the leadership was only the beginning. Sandra had not come to decapitate the Zephyrian government. She had come to eliminate their entire species. The second wave of attacks targeted civilian population centers with weapons designed to cause maximum suffering. Dr. Wright's latest creations did not simply destroy buildings or kill quickly. They attacked Zephyrian biology, directly causing the same kind of conscious agony that humans had experienced during harvest operations. Captain Lisa Morgan led fighter squadrons that strafed refugee columns fleeing the burning cities. The pilots had learned their trade by watching recordings of Zephyrian soldiers murdering human children. They applied those lessons with deadly precision as alien families tried desperately to escape the bombardment. Ground forces under Colonel Frank Torres landed in the ruins of Zephyr Prime's major cities and began systematic elimination operations. The soldiers moved through the streets with flamethrowers and quantum disruptors, hunting down any surviving aliens. No prisoners were taken and no mercy was shown. The Zephyrians, who had once harvested humans like cattle, now experienced the terror of being hunted by a superior predator. They begged for mercy from soldiers who remembered the children of Luna Base. They offered to surrender to forces that had no interest in prisoners. Frank's troops had trained for this moment by studying recordings of Zephyrian harvest operations. They knew exactly how the aliens had processed human populations, and they returned the favor with interest. The processing centers they established were more efficient than anything the Empire had built. Carl Stone coordinated the release of biological weapons specifically engineered to target Zephyrian DNA. The viruses spread through the planet's atmosphere and water supply, ensuring that any survivors of the bombardment would face slow and agonizing death. The weapons were based on research conducted during the early days of the harvest, when human scientists had studied captured alien biology. Every weakness in Zephyrian physiology had been cataloged and weaponized. The species that had considered themselves genetically superior was being destroyed by their own biological vulnerabilities. Reports arrived from other battle groups attacking Zephyrian core worlds throughout the Empire. The coordinated assault was proceeding according to plan. Alien fleets that tried to respond to the attacks found themselves facing human forces that fought with suicidal determination and superior weapons. Jake Morrison led the assault on the Zephyrian Military Academy, where alien officers had been trained for centuries. The facility was defended by the Empire's elite guards using their most advanced weapons. The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete extermination of everyone inside. The resistance fighters who followed Jake through the Academy's corridors were not professional soldiers, but they fought with the fury of parents who had lost their children. They gave no quarter and expected none in return. The aliens who had murdered defenseless humans learned what it felt like to face enemies who would never stop hunting them. Engineer Kelly Thompson's weapons teams deployed planet crackers against worlds that tried to surrender. The devices were designed to destabilize planetary cores and cause complete destruction of the target worlds. Entire Zephyrian populations were eliminated in seconds as their home planets tore themselves apart. The psychological impact on the remaining Zephyrian worlds was devastating. An empire that had ruled through fear for millennia was experiencing terror for the first time. Alien populations fled toward the outer rim, abandoning their colonies as human battle groups systematically worked their way through Zephyrian Space. Emperor Zethkar's final transmission before his death was broadcast throughout the galaxy. The alien ruler finally understood what his empire had awakened when they began harvesting human children. He warned other species to avoid contact with humanity at all costs. The galaxy's new apex predator showed no mercy to anyone who opposed them. Sandra watched the Emperor die in his burning palace and felt no satisfaction. The alien's death was just one small payment toward the debt owed for Katie Wright and the thousands of other children murdered during the harvest. True justice would require the extinction of every Zephyrian in the galaxy. The battle for Zephyr Prime ended with the planet's surface reduced to radioactive ash. No alien life remained on the world that had been the Empire's capital for thousands of years. The elegant cities and ancient monuments were gone forever along with everyone who had lived there, but the war was far from over. Hundreds of Zephyrian worlds remained to be cleansed, and millions of aliens were still alive to face judgment for their species' crimes. Sandra's forces prepared to jump to their next target, where the process of extermination would begin again. The galaxy was learning. What happened when humans stopped trying to be civilized and embraced their nature as the ultimate predators? The species that had once explored space with wonder and hope was methodically eliminating everyone who had threatened their children. The Zephyrian Empire had awakened humanity's fury, and now they were experiencing the consequences of that mistake. Their worlds would burn until every last alien was dead, and the galaxy belonged to the species they had tried to harvest. The hunt would continue until justice was complete, and the screams of human children were finally answered with silence. President Helen Davis stood before the assembled leaders of humanity's military forces as reports arrived from across the galaxy. The systematic extermination of the Zephyrian Empire was proceeding ahead of schedule. In 18 months of coordinated attacks, human forces had reduced a civilization that had ruled for millennia to scattered refugees hiding in the outer rim. The transformation was complete. The species that had once dreamed of peaceful exploration among the stars had become the galaxy's most efficient killers. Every human ship carried weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering to alien biology. Every soldier had trained. By studying recordings of murdered children, General Jake Morrison reported from the former Zephyrian industrial world of Kepler-7. His forces had spent 3 days hunting down the last survivors hiding in the planet's underground cities. The aliens who had once harvested humans like cattle were now being processed through extermination facilities that made their own bioships look primitive. The irony was not lost on anyone. The Zephyrians had taught humanity to be monsters, and now they were facing the consequences of that education. The species they had considered prey had evolved into predators that surpassed their teachers in every measure of cruelty and efficiency. Admiral Patricia Lee coordinated the final phase of Operation Retribution from her flagship above the burning ruins of the Zephyrian homeworld. Her fleets had sterilized over 300 alien worlds in the past year. Entire star systems had been reduced to radioactive debris fields where nothing would ever live again. Dr. Susan Wright had perfected weapons that went beyond simple destruction. Her latest creations attacked Zephyrian neural systems, causing the same kind of conscious agony that humans had experienced during harvest operations. The aliens died slowly and in perfect awareness of their own extinction. The biological weapons that Dr. Carlstone had developed were spreading through Zephyrian space faster than their fleets could retreat. The viruses targeted alien DNA with surgical precision, ensuring that any survivors of the initial attacks would face inevitable death. The elegant Zephyrian biology that had seemed so superior was being systematically destroyed by microscopic weapons. Captain Tony Rodriguez led the assault on the last major Zephyrian population center in the galaxy. The world of Sanctuary held nearly 50 million aliens who had fled there as human forces systematically destroyed their empire. The planet's defenses had been built over centuries and were considered impregnable by their designers. Tony's fleet reduced them to vapor in less than an hour. The quantum disruptors that had once seemed like miraculous weapons were now standard equipment on every human warship. The technology that Dr. Wright had developed in desperate grief over her murdered daughter had become the foundation of humanity's galactic dominance. The bombardment of Sanctuary was broadcast live throughout human space so that everyone could witness the final moments of their former oppressors. 50 million Zephyrians died as their world burned under weapons that turned matter into energy. Their screams were recorded and transmitted to every human settlement as proof that justice had finally been served. Engineer Kelly Thompson watched from her command ship as the planet cracked apart under the assault. She had lost her husband and sons to a Zephyrian bioship and had devoted her life to building weapons that could kill aliens more efficiently. The sight of Sanctuary's destruction filled her with a satisfaction that was almost spiritual. Colonel Frank Torres commanded ground forces that hunted down the few survivors who had escaped the initial bombardment in deep shelters. His soldiers moved through the ruins with systematic precision, eliminating any alien life they encountered. The Zephyrians, who had processed human children through their bioships, were given no opportunity to surrender or beg for mercy. The hunt continued for days as human forces scoured every cave and bunker on the planet's surface. The aliens who had once ruled the galaxy were reduced to hiding like animals while their former prey stalked them with advanced weapons and implacable determination. Dr. Stone released his final biological weapon into the galaxy's trade routes and communication networks. The virus was designed to remain dormant in ship hulls and data transmissions until it encountered Zephyrian DNA. Any aliens who had escaped the military campaigns would face slow death as the weapon spread throughout their refuges. The extinction protocol was more thorough than anything the Zephyrians had developed for harvesting other species. Where the aliens had processed populations for their useful components, humans simply eliminated everything. No Zephyrian would survive to threaten human children ever again. President Davis addressed the galaxy through captured alien communication networks as the final Zephyrian strongholds fell to human assault forces. Her words were transmitted to every inhabited world in known space as a warning to any species that might consider humanity weak or vulnerable. She spoke about the children of Luna Base and Kepler Station who had died at alien hands. She described the harvest operations and the bioships that had processed conscious humans into computer components. She explained that humanity had not forgotten any of these crimes and had extracted full payment from their perpetrators. The president's message was simple and clear. Humanity had learned to be predators and would destroy any species that threatened them. The galaxy now belonged to humans by right of conquest, and any challenges to their authority would be met with immediate extermination. General Sandra Brooks reported from the ruins of Zephyr Prime, where the last resistance had finally been crushed. The Emperor's palace was a crater filled with radioactive glass, and the elegant cities that had stood for millennia were ash-blowing in contaminated winds. Nothing lived on the world that had been the Empire's capital. The systematic destruction was complete. An empire that had ruled thousands of worlds for thousands of years had been reduced to silence in less than 2 years of human warfare. The Zephyrian species was extinct, and their civilization was erased from the galaxy's history. Captain Lisa Morgan piloted her fighter through the debris field that had once been the Zephyrian Naval Academy. The facility where alien officers had trained for centuries was now expanding clouds of atomized matter drifting between the stars. The knowledge and traditions of an ancient civilization had been obliterated, along with everyone who carried them. The victory celebrations on Earth lasted for weeks as humanity celebrated the complete destruction of their former oppressors. Children who had grown up hearing stories about the harvest watched recordings of burning alien worlds and learned that justice had been served. The species that had once threatened them was gone forever. Jake Morrison stood in the Memorial Hall on Earth, where the names of every human killed during the harvest were inscribed in black stone. 50,000 names from Kepler Station, 12,000 from Luna Base, millions more from colonies throughout human space. All of them had been avenged. The transformation of humanity was irreversible. The peaceful civilization that had once existed was gone and could never be restored. In its place was something harder and more dangerous that had proven itself capable of genocide on a galactic scale. President Davis spoke at the dedication of the memorial, and her words summarized everything that had changed about her species. Humanity had not started the war, but they had finished it completely and permanently. The galaxy's former rulers were extinct, and humans had taken their place as the apex predators of known space. The warning was clear to any species that might consider challenging humanity's new dominance. The children who had died during the harvest would never be forgotten, and their deaths had taught humans lessons about warfare and hatred that no enemy would ever overcome. Dr. Wright stood beside her daughter's name carved into the memorial wall, and felt a peace she had not known since Katie's death. The weapons she had created in grief and rage had served their purpose. Every Zephyrian who had participated in the harvest was dead, and their species would never threaten human children again. The galaxy belonged to humanity now. The species that had once explored space with wonder and optimism had become its undisputed masters through superior firepower and absolute ruthlessness. The lesson was complete and would never need to be repeated. Any aliens who encountered humans in the future would face a species that had learned to kill with perfect efficiency and showed no mercy to anyone who threatened their young. The harvest had taught humanity to be monsters, and the galaxy would never be safe from them again. The Zephyrian Empire had been turned to ash by humanity's fury, and from those ashes had risen a new galactic order ruled by the species they had tried to destroy. The children of Luna Base and Kepler Station had been avenged, and their deaths had reshaped the universe forever. The hunt was over. The predators had won.